Ancient civilizations built wonders without rulers or scales, as we know them. They relied on 21 obscure measurement systems, from the Egyptian cubit to the Indus Valley's mysterious units, to construct their world. By the end of this journey, you will understand how a simple basket of grain or a length of rope could dictate the rise and fall of entire empires. How did a society measure its wealth without coins, or plan a city without a standard map? The answers reveal a forgotten layer of human ingenuity. What does it truly take to hold a civilization together? That carved rod in the architect's hand was more than a tool. It was a portable standard of cosmic order. The Egyptian cubit was a physical link between the human body and the monumental, a way to translate a pharaoh's divine will into a mountain of stone. Historian John Romer captured its essence, noting the cubit was not just a unit, it was a symbol of order in a chaotic world. This idea of harmony was built right into the system. A royal cubit, the standard for grand projects, measured roughly 52.5 centimeters, the length from a man's elbow to his fingertip, but it did not stop there. This master unit was meticulously divided. 7 palms made a cubit, and 4 digits, the width of a finger, made a single palm. This gave builders a flexible language of measurement, allowing them to plot the vast base of the Great Pyramid with one set of calculations, and then carve the intricate details of a temple relief with another. The tools themselves, cubit rods often made of polished wood or stone, were frequently inscribed with the names of gods and protective symbols. They were not mere rulers, they were sacred objects, their consistent length a form of ritual precision. Imagine trying to coordinate thousands of workers across a sprawling construction site without that shared, unwavering standard. Blocks would not fit, slopes would misalign, and the entire geometric perfection of the pyramid would be impossible. The cubit's reign extended far beyond the desert sands, influencing trade along the Nile and even sea routes, proving that a civilization's most enduring legacy often starts with the length of its own arm. But that stone weight in the merchant's hand was just as vital as the architect's rod. In the sun-baked markets of Mesopotamia, the true measure of an empire was not its monuments, but its silver. The shekel was the lifeblood of this early economy, a small weight that powered a vast network of trade and law. Derived from the ancient Akkadian word meaning simply to weigh, the shekel was a promise of consistency in a world of chaotic exchange. Imagine a merchant selling a sack of grain. He would not barter or guess its worth. Instead, he would place a polished stone weight, certified by the temple or palace, on one side of a balance scale and carefully pour silver rings or chunks onto the other until the beam leveled. This simple act, repeated thousands of times from Babylon to Ur, was the foundation of the world's first complex markets. Historian Mark van der Meerup argues that this system of weighed silver, the shekel, enabled the very first forms of contract and credit, effectively laying the groundwork for modern finance. A single shekel was roughly 8.3 grams, a weight small enough for daily purchases but substantial enough for major transactions. It was subdivided into smaller units like the juru for buying a loaf of bread, while thousands of shekels could measure the tribute from a conquered city. This system was so deeply trusted that it was codified into law. The famous Code of Hammurabi specifies fines for injuries, payments for services, and the value of goods, all in precise numbers of shekels. A broken bone had a price, a surgeon's fee was set, and a man's debt was quantified. This was not just commerce, it was a legal framework for society itself, all balanced on a set of stone weights. What does this tell us? That the human need for fairness in exchange is ancient and profound. We invented weights to create trust between strangers, to build an economy that could stretch beyond a single village. And just as the shekel measured solid goods, another system was needed to measure what poured and flowed, a system that would quite literally feed entire populations. A soldier's loyalty could be measured in grain. Deep within the stone granaries that dotted the Roman Empire, the Modius was the standard that determined a legionary's daily bread, and by extension, the stability of the state itself. This simple wooden or bronze container, holding roughly 8.75 liters of wheat or barley, was far more than a bucket. It was a fundamental instrument of imperial power. Historian Mary Beard confirms that the Modius was a tool of control, helping Rome feed its legions and maintain peace in provinces far from the capital. Every Modius vessel was stamped with an imperial seal, a guarantee of its volume that transformed a chaotic pile of grain into a precise unit of account. This accuracy was everything. It allowed officials to calculate the exact rations for 1,000 soldiers on the Rhine frontier, to assess taxes from a North African farm, and to distribute free grain to the restless masses in Rome itself. The Modius did not work alone. It was part of an integrated family of measures, the Cestatius for doling out wine and olive oil, and the Jugerum for surveying the very farmland that produced the wealth. This coordination created a seamless network from field to fort to forum. When famine threatened, this system became the empire's lifeline. Emperors like Augustus used Modius calculations to orchestrate massive grain imports from Egypt, shipping precisely measured millions of liters to avert starvation and the riots that would inevitably follow. The message was clear. Rome's strength was not just in its legions, but in its ability to measure, to distribute, and to provide. How many loyalties were secured not by a sword, but by a full Modius of wheat? This Roman focus on sustenance reveals a universal truth. Every civilization had to solve the same basic problem of feeding its people, and each developed its own unique vessels to measure what nourished them. A single misstep with a medicinal formula could turn a life-saving elixir into a deadly poison. For an ancient Chinese alchemist, the fen provided the essential margin of safety, a minuscule weight so precise it could govern the balance of health itself. This unit, part of the sprawling Shi system, was equivalent to roughly 0.37 grams, a measurement smaller than a single grain of rice. It was a tool of profound responsibility, used to weigh out potent herbs and minerals for remedies that aimed to harmonize the body's vital energies. The philosopher Confucius once observed that the superior man is exact in his words and measures, a principle that elevated this technical precision into a moral virtue. This cultural insistence on accuracy meant the fen was not confined to the apothecary's workshop. It was integral to the advanced metallurgy that produced exquisite bronze vessels, and it formed the bedrock of commerce, seamlessly integrating with larger units like the liang or tael and the jin, the kati. This standardized system allowed merchants to trade silk and tea along the Silk Road with unwavering trust, knowing that a jin of silk measured in the capital was the same in a distant oasis town. But its most critical application was in medicine. Foundational texts like the Huangdi Nijing specified herbal dosages in fen, ensuring that a physician's prescription would be consistently replicated, safeguarding public health through meticulous measurement. This reveals a civilization that saw no separation between the spiritual and the scientific, where a healer's intuitive wisdom was given tangible form through the exacting weight of the fen. How many lives were saved by that devotion to a fraction of a gram? This pursuit of balance through weight was a global phenomenon, and across the ocean, the peoples of the Andes developed a system of measurement that did not rely on weight at all, but on a far more abstract and brilliant concept. A highland family's survival was determined by a length of knotted cord. The Inca Topo was not merely a unit of land. It was the empire's solution to feeding millions across some of the most vertiginous terrain on Earth. Roughly 2.7 acres, the Topo represented the amount of land a single family could reasonably farm to sustain itself and produce a surplus for the state. But how could such a standard be applied uniformly from a steep valley to a high plateau? The answer lay in the quipu, a complex device of colored and knotted strings that recorded everything from population counts to grain stores. Archaeologist Gary Urton explains that the Topo and quipu together formed a sophisticated data management system that supported one of the world's most organized societies. An administrator using a quipu as his ledger could assign topo plots based on soil quality and altitude, ensuring a fair, if not equal, distribution. This meticulous accounting prevented conflicts over precious arable land and bound the empire together through a shared obligation. In the Sacred Valley, the tribute a community owed, whether in sacks of maize or baskets of potatoes, was calculated directly from the number of topo units it farmed. This integrated economics with ritual and governance, turning a simple measurement of earth into a covenant between the people and their divine ruler, the Sapa Inca. The system reflected a profound harmony with nature, acknowledging that the land itself dictated the terms of survival. This intricate web of measurement, however, required physical pathways to function, which is why the Incas next turned their attention to carving precise linear routes through the very mountains they called home. A champion's glory was measured in a single, explosive sprint across the stadium track. The Greek Stade, a distance of roughly 185 meters, was far more than the length of a foot race. It was a fundamental building block of the entire Greek world. This unit gave structure to everything from a soldier's march to a geographer's map of the known world. The historian Herodotus used the Stade to describe the vastness of the Persian Empire, calculating the distances its armies had to traverse, while the philosopher Plato saw a deeper truth, stating that measurement and proportion are found in all works of beauty. This belief in harmonious ratios meant the Stade was not just for measuring space, but for creating it. The Stade itself was subdivided into 100 orguia, the length of a man's outstretched arms, and 6 plethra. This flexible system allowed architects to precisely plan the Parthenon, ensuring its columns and platform adhered to proportions that felt inherently balanced and magnificent to the human eye. In the bustling port of Piraeus, engineers used these same units to design harbors and shipyards, creating the infrastructure for a maritime empire. At sea, captains logged their voyages in stades, a practice that enabled trade routes to stretch from the Black Sea to the coast of Spain, planting Greek colonies along the way. The stade's endurance from the Olympic track to the open ocean reveals a culture that seamlessly wove practicality with a pursuit of ideal form. How many other civilizations measured their days not in distance, but in the arc of the sun itself? Our path now leads to a culture that did exactly that, carving the very hours from stone and shadow. The rhythm of the Maya universe was not measured in years, but in the steady, sacred pulse of the ton. For a priest astronomer perched atop a pyramid in Tikal, this unit of 360 days was the fundamental gear in a vast celestial clockwork, the long count calendar. It allowed them to track not just seasons but epochs, bundling tons into larger cycles like the katon of 20 tons and the bakton of 400. This precise temporal architecture was the key to predicting the dance of Venus, the terror of a solar eclipse, and the exact moment the rains would return to nourish the maize. Anthropologist Linda Scheel captured the profound weight of this system, noting that the Maya saw time as a sacred burden, measured precisely to maintain cosmic order. This was not science for its own sake, it was a spiritual contract with the gods. The turning of a ton dictated when to plant and when to harvest, weaving the agricultural life of the community directly into the fabric of the cosmos. The end of a cycle was a moment of immense power, often marked by the coronation of a new king or the raising of a stela, a stone pillar inscribed with history. These acts were a form of political and divine engineering, using the measurement of time to legitimize a ruler's authority and prove his alignment with the heavens. Every inscription declaring a new Katon was a promise that the cosmic order remained intact. How did this shape their understanding of destiny? They believed history itself was cyclical, with past events destined to recur in similar patterns. By measuring time with such obsessive accuracy, they sought to navigate these cycles to appease the gods and ensure their world would continue. This profound connection between measurement and cosmic order finds a parallel in a system that sought to quantify the very earth that grew their food. The streets of Mohenjo-Daro ran with a precision that feels almost modern. This was the work of the Dhanus, a unit of length close to 1.9 meters that gave the Indus Valley its remarkable order. Imagine a city planner laying out a new neighborhood, not with a random pace, but with this standardized measure, ensuring every main avenue and side street adhered to a master grid. The name itself offers a clue derived from the Sanskrit word for a bow, suggesting its origin may have been the length of a man's weapon, but its application was purely civic. This consistent measure allowed for the mass production of bricks, with their dimensions locked into perfect ratios of the Dhanus. Archaeologist Jonathan Mark Kenoyer points to this consistency as proof of a highly centralized authority and shared cultural norms, a system that fostered social stability through uniformity. For the finer details, builders turned to smaller units like the angular, the width of a finger, allowing them to craft everything from the precise slopes of elaborate drainage channels to the identical proportions of houses for both the elite and the commoner. Excavations reveal this standard was not a local quirk. Bricks from distant Harappan sites share the same proportions, a testament to a quality control system that spanned a subcontinent. This was not just about aesthetics, it was about public health, efficient trade, and a shared urban identity. What can this persistence teach us? That the first step toward a stable civilization is often agreeing on the length of a single brick. And just as the Dhanus shaped the city's physical space, another system was needed to measure the grain that filled its storerooms and fed its workers. A royal messenger's speed was the empire's pulse, and his progress was measured in parasangs. This Persian unit of distance, roughly 3.5 miles, was the invisible thread stitching together an empire that stretched from the Nile to the Indus River. For the Achaemenid kings, controlling this vast territory was not just about military might, it was about the speed of information. The historian Herodotus marveled at the royal couriers who raced along the royal road, covering parasang after parasang with relentless speed to deliver the king's decrees. The genius of the parasang was its beautiful simplicity. It was not an abstract number, it was the distance a person could walk in a single hour across average terrain. This human-scale definition made it instantly adaptable. A military commander planning a march through mountains or a merchant plotting a caravan route across a desert could calculate his journey in days and hours, not just in arbitrary lengths. This logistical precision was systematized by rulers like Darius the Great, who organized a network of rest stops and supplied depots at regular parasang intervals. A messenger knew exactly where to find a fresh horse, a caravan could plan its overnight stops, and a marching army could be supplied with food and water. This reliable infrastructure transformed a collection of conquered lands into a single, functioning organism. How did such a simple unit of distance enable the cohesion of a multicultural empire? It created a shared language of movement and time that everyone, from a Babylonian scribe to a Greek merchant, could understand and rely upon. This focus on measuring movement reveals a universal imperial need, but other civilizations measured their wealth not in miles traveled, but in the very substance of life itself. A chieftain's honor was measured in cattle and cauldrons long before Roman coins ever crossed the Alps. The Celtic Cestatius was not a minted piece of metal, but a unit of value, a promise rooted in the tangible wealth of the tribe. It allowed for the exchange of a prized sword for a dozen sheep, or a fine bronze cauldron for several measures of strong ale, creating a common language of worth across a decentralized society. Historian Barry Cunliffe explains that the Cestatius represented a bridge between tangible wealth and abstract value, allowing for complex social transactions. This system gave structure to the great seasonal fairs where tribes gathered. Here, a chieftain could pay tribute to a more powerful rival, not with random gifts, but with a precise value expressed in cestatii, a payment that solidified alliances and prevented war. The value itself was often calculated against a weight of silver, or more commonly, against the utility of essential items, a practice that connected this abstract number directly to the realities of life and status. What does this evolution reveal about the human journey from barter to currency? It shows that money is not the invention, trust is. The Cestatius was a tool for building that trust, for allowing a society to agree that a thing could stand for the value of another thing, a crucial mental leap toward a modern economy. This human desire to find common value in disparate things extended far beyond the earthly realm, reaching for a standard not found in cattle or silver, but in the perfect, predictable motions of the stars. A Babylonian astronomer's chart of the stars began with a line measured in Nindan. This 6-meter unit was the standard for quantifying both the land and the sky, a tool that linked the precise dimensions of a ziggurate's base to the predicted paths of planets on a clay tablet. Scholar Otto Neugebauer observed that the Nindan allowed Babylonians to quantify the cosmos, blending their meticulous science with a rich mythological understanding of universal order. This was a system of profound integration. For their grand celestial maps, astronomers used the Nindan to calculate and record the intervals between stars, translating the vast, silent heavens into a structured grid of measurable data. On the ground, the same unit was the foundation of urban planning and agriculture. A surveyor would measure out a field in Nindan to ensure fair allocation among farmers, and engineers used it to plot the courses of vital irrigation canals, directing water with a precision that fed the entire empire. The Nindan did not stand alone. It was subdivided into 12 smaller units called kus, which builders used to draft the intricate stairways and inner chambers of their towering ziggurates. Every step and doorway adhered to a sacred geometry derived from this master measure, making the temple itself a physical echo of the cosmic order they charted above. How did such a linear measurement influence both earthly and cosmic understandings? It created a single, coherent language for describing a world where the divine and the practical were inseparable, where the width of a canal and the movement of Jupiter were part of the same grand design. From measuring the length of the world and the heavens, we find a civilization that sought to weigh the very elements of life itself. A lord's power was not held in a castle, but in a granary. The Japanese Koku measured a domain's true strength, quantifying its wealth in units of rice. Roughly 180 liters of unhulled grain, this single volume became the currency of an entire era, the Edo period. A powerful daimyo's influence was not counted in soldiers alone, but in the thousands of koku his lands produced each year. This rice was the engine of the state. It paid the stipends of the samurai class, funded infrastructure projects, and filled the shogun's coffers through a standardized tax system. Historian Constantine Vaporis confirms that the koku system underpinned the entire social hierarchy from peasant to shogun. This was a society built on a foundation of measured grain. The system created a rigid but stable order. A samurai's loyalty was secured by a fixed annual rice allowance, while a daimyo's prestige and political standing were directly tied to the koku yield from his province. The Tokugawa shogunate wielded this as a masterful tool of control. They required every lord to report their domain's total koku, a number that dictated how many men they could arm and how large a castle they could maintain. A suspiciously high or low figure could invite shogunal scrutiny or even military intervention. The rice storehouses that dotted the landscape were more than just barns. They were the banks and arsenals of their age, physical symbols of a ruler's capacity to feed his people and wage war. How did a volumetric unit become such an effective instrument of political control? It transformed an abstract concept like power into something that could be counted, stored, and strategically distributed. This intricate system, however, was uniquely suited to the fertile, rice-based economy of Japan. Other civilizations facing harsher climates developed measurements that reflected a far more precarious relationship with the land. A Viking trader's word was sealed by the length of his own arm. The Norse L, a unit rooted in the forearm from elbow to fingertip, was the portable standard that fueled their far-reaching commerce. While typically around 50 centimeters in Scandinavia, its exact length could vary from one trading town to the next, a flexibility that required constant awareness rather than rigid uniformity. This very adaptability was its strength. In a bustling market in Hedeby, a merchant would use his certified L stick, often a carved piece of wood, to measure out a bolt of woolen cloth for a foreign buyer. This simple act of laying the stick along the fabric prevented disputes and built the trust necessary for deals struck between strangers from different worlds. The renowned archaeologist Else Rosedal confirms that the L was a portable standard that enabled Vikings to trade from Greenland to Constantinople. Its utility extended far beyond the marketplace. In the shipyard, master builders used the L and its smaller division, the Alen, to ensure the precise proportions of a longship's keel, the curve of its hull, and the cut of its sail. This meticulous measurement was not about aesthetics, it was about survival, guaranteeing the vessel's seaworthiness on the treacherous open ocean. The L's authority was even woven into the law. The Icelandic sagas are filled with accounts where agreements over land inheritance or compensation for goods were formally settled using L measurements, often sworn upon with witnesses. What does this regional variation teach us? That a successful measurement system does not always require absolute uniformity, but rather a shared understanding and a tool for consistent local practice. It was a system built for a practical, mobile people, one that measured the cloth for a sail and the timber for a home with the same reliable standard. From the arm's length that built ships, we now turn to a system that measured the very earth those ships sailed past, a unit that quantified the agricultural bounty of a sun-drenched landscape. The sheer scale of a Sumerian temple's grain stores could determine the fate of the city. Within the vast mud brick storerooms, the gur was the ultimate measure of collective survival, a large ceramic vessel holding roughly 300 liters of barley that powered the world's first bureaucracies. Economic historian Peter Steinkeller confirms that the gur was the backbone of Sumerian administration, turning agriculture into a calculable resource. This was not a haphazard pile of grain, it was a meticulously managed asset. The gur sat at the top of a brilliantly logical sexagesimal system, a base 60 structure that still echoes in our 60-minute hours today. One gur was divided into 5 bariga, and each bariga into 6 sila, a smaller unit perfect for a single worker's daily ration. This mathematical precision allowed temple scribes to keep flawless records on their clay tablets, tracking every sila distributed from the central granary. Imagine the scene: a line of laborers who had spent the day maintaining a vital irrigation canal would approach the temple officials. Each man would receive his allotted measure of grain, a direct payment for his work that fed his family and sustained the entire agricultural system. This was organized labor on a massive scale, with the gur as its payroll. The system's authority was so absolute that it was codified into law. The Code of Namu, one of the oldest legal documents in existence, specifies fines for offenses not in silver but in gur of barley. A wrongful injury had a price, a broken contract a penalty, all quantified in this fundamental unit of sustenance. How did such volumetric standards foster the growth of cities? They transformed a volatile harvest into a predictable, divisible, and accountable resource, enabling leaders to support a non-farming population of priests, artisans, and soldiers. This was the arithmetic of civilization itself, measured out in gur. From the capacity that fed the city, we now shift to a system that measured the land itself in a uniquely creative and enduring way. A farmer's entire world was defined by the square of land he could cultivate with his own hands. The Aztec Quahuitl was a unit of land area that turned the unique ecology of Lake Texcoco into the engine of an empire. Roughly equivalent to a plot measuring 20 by 20 brasas or arm spans, this measure represented the amount of fertile soil a single family could reasonably work to feed themselves and produce a surplus. This was not abstract geometry, it was the practical mathematics of survival applied to the Chainampas, the incredibly productive floating gardens that fed the sprawling capital of Tenochtitlan. Anthropologist Michael Smith notes that the Quahuitl tied land measurement to social obligations, ensuring communities contributed to the state. The system's genius lay in its fairness and adaptability. A local administrator consulting a painted codex like the Mendoza could allocate Quahuitl plots based on the quality of the soil and the size of a family, ensuring that the most productive land near the lake shores was used to its fullest potential. This careful distribution prevented conflict and maximized the yield of maize, beans, and squash, but the Quahuitl's role extended far beyond subsistence. It was the fundamental unit for assessing tribute. A conquered region would be surveyed, its arable land measured in Quahuitl, and its tax burden calculated accordingly. The records kept by skilled scribes using vivid pictograms might show one Quahuitl owed 20 baskets of maize, while another owed a quantity of woven cloth or precious cacao beans. This systematic extraction of wealth, all quantified through this single land measure, was the financial backbone of Aztec dominance. How did land measures reflect the interplay between ecology and empire? The Quahuitl proves that an empire's strength is often rooted in its ability to measure and manage the very earth beneath its feet. This focus on land, however, required a parallel system to weigh the goods that land produced, a system of portable standards that could travel across mountains and deserts to connect distant markets. A Phoenician merchant's promise was weighed in talents. On a bustling dock in Tyre, a stone weight carved to a precise mass, typically around 30 kilograms, would be placed on a balance scale to measure out gleaming silver ingots or a sack of rare tin. This was the talent, the anchor of a trade network that crisscrossed the entire Mediterranean. More than just a unit, it was a universal currency of trust. a consistent standard that allowed a merchant from Carthage to strike a deal with a Greek buyer or an Egyptian official without dispute. Historian Maria Eugenia Orbit confirms that the talent was a universal language in Phoenician ports, enabling trust in diverse markets. This reliability was crucial for their most precious cargoes, particularly the legendary Tyrian purple dye, a substance so valuable it was literally worth its weight in silver. A single talent of the extracted dye, painstakingly produced from thousands of sea snails, could represent a fortune. The system enabled more than simple barter. It allowed for sophisticated contracts and maritime loans. A ship's captain might receive a loan of 5 talents of silver to fund his voyage, with the agreement to repay the amount plus interest upon his safe return with a cargo of Spanish silver or Cypriot copper. These agreements, sometimes recorded on fragile papyrus or broken pieces of pottery called ostraca, formed the bedrock of early banking. The physical weights themselves, often discovered in ancient shipwrecks, tell a story of rigorous standardization, their consistent mass a silent testament to a commercial empire built on precision. What role did such weight systems play in the spread of culture and technology? The Phoenician talent did not just move goods, it carried ideas, alphabets, and metallurgical skills across the sea, weaving together the coastal civilizations of the ancient world. This mastery of mass and trade required a parallel understanding of time, a rhythm not of markets but of the sun and stars themselves. The farmer's entire existence was governed by the Eight, a span of time that was also a measure of the land itself. This dual-purpose unit defined the rhythm of the Nile's annual inundation, the single most important event in the Egyptian world, roughly equivalent to the flood period. The Eight cleaved the year into 3 distinct seasons, Akhit, Peret, and Shemu, which translated directly into the cycles of flooding, planting, and harvesting. The entire society moved to this beat. Egyptologist Toby Wilkinson captured its essence, writing, "The Eight was the rhythm of life in Egypt, binding the people to the river and the gods." This was not a calendar imposed on nature, but one drawn directly from it. The key signal was the heliacal rising of Sirius, when the brilliant star first became visible just before dawn. This celestial event heralded the coming flood, triggering a cascade of preparations, from the reinforcing of canals to the movement of entire communities to higher ground. The Eight's influence was both spiritual and brutally practical. It was divided into 4 months, creating a calendar that priests used to schedule festivals honoring the gods of the river, while scribes used that same framework for land surveys. After the waters receded, leaving behind a fresh layer of fertile black silt, surveyors would walk the fields with their measuring cords, reassessing plots in 8 units. A farmer's tax burden was not fixed. It was calculated based on the 8 cycle and the measured size of his newly renewed land. This ensured a profound fairness, as a man whose field was washed away or enlarged by the flood's caprice would only pay for what he could actually cultivate. How did such time units integrate nature into human organization? The 8 proves that the most resilient systems are those that listen to the world, turning the unpredictable fury of a river into a predictable foundation for civilization. This deep connection to the environment finds a parallel in a desert empire, where survival depended on measuring not just time and land, but the precious volumes of water and grain that sustained life. A merchant in the port of Adulis would seal a deal for ivory not with a coin, but with a measured volume of grain. The Aksumite massa, a ceramic container holding roughly 10 liters, was the standard that transformed raw materials into imperial wealth. This unit, verified by official seals on its clay vessels, brought order to the chaotic flow of goods from the African interior to waiting Roman and Indian ships. Archaeologist Rodolfo Fatovich confirms that the massa allowed Axum to monetize its resources, creating wealth that built obelisks and palaces. Imagine the scene: a trader from the highlands arrives with a load of fragrant incense. An Axumite official would carefully pour the resin into a certified massa container, leveling the top with a wooden stick to ensure an exact measure. This precise volume then determined its value in trade, a process repeated for gold, dust, salt, and exotic animal skins. The system was beautifully scalable. For smaller transactions, the massa was divided into kunas, allowing a local market vendor to sell a kuna of oil or honey with the same confidence as a royal merchant exporting 100 massa of ivory. Inscriptions carved on stone stelae at the capital record tributes from subjugated kingdoms, not in vague promises, but in exact numbers of massa of gold or spices, turning this measurement into an instrument of political power. What can the massa teach us about cross-cultural measurement adaptations? Its persistence shows that for trade to flourish across cultures, the units of exchange must be transparent and mutually understood, a lesson in building trust through consistent volume. From the measured containers that filled Axum's treasury, we now turn to the lengths that defined another civilization's architectural ambition. A fortress wall's defensive strength relied on the precise length of the cup. This half-meter unit, roughly the span from a man's hip to the ground, was the Hittite engineer's master key for constructing an empire in rugged Anatolia. From the Cyclopean stone blocks of Hattus's city walls to the paved roads that moved armies, every project depended on this standardized measure. The historian Trevor Bryce captured its essence, noting the cup embodied Hittite pragmatism, turning measurement into a tool of imperial defense. On a bustling construction site, overseers wielding certified cupsticks could direct workers to lay stones with exact spacing, ensuring that defensive walls were uniformly thick and impenetrable. This same precision was applied to the empire's offensive capabilities, calculating the dimensions of massive siege ramps and the timber frames for battering rams. The cup's authority extended from the battlefield to the courtroom. Surviving legal tablets reveal that disputes over farmland or property boundaries were settled by official surveyors using cup measurements, their verdicts binding under the king's law. This integration of a single linear standard into both military engineering and civil justice created a cohesive, manageable state. How did such linear standards contribute to the longevity of empires? They provided a common language for building and governing, turning chaotic landscapes into ordered, defensible territory. This practical approach to measurement, focused on strength and stability, stands in stark contrast to a system designed for an entirely different purpose, one that weighed not stone but the very essence of beauty and power. A king's portrait could now fit in the palm of your hand, and with it the entire concept of money changed forever. The Lydian stater was not merely a unit of weight, it was a revolution cast in precious metal. In the kingdom of Lydia, around the 7th century before the Common Era, a ruler authorized the striking of the world's first coins, transforming the stater from an abstract measure into a tangible object of guaranteed value. Typically weighing around 14 grams for the gold version, these small, bean-shaped lumps of electrum, a natural alloy of gold and silver, were stamped with a lion's head, the symbol of the Lydian royal house. This stamp was a promise, a royal guarantee that the piece contained a specific, standardized weight of precious metal. Numismatist John H. Kroll observed that the stater transformed wealth from bulk to portable form, sparking a financial revolution. This portability was its genius. Before the stater, a major transaction required scales, weights, and the careful weighing of silver dust or cumbersome ingots. Now, a merchant could simply count out a handful of these identical coins to pay for a shipment of olive oil or a team of horses. The system streamlined everything from market exchanges to the collection of taxes, as royal officials could demand payment in these uniform status rather than in a chaotic assortment of goods. The most famous of these, the Croesus stata, named for the legendary king, became so trusted that its value was recognized far beyond Lydia's borders, circulating throughout the Greek world and the Eastern Mediterranean. This enhanced Lydia's economic influence dramatically, turning its capital, Sardes, into a financial hub. What does the stata's legacy reveal about the power of standardized weight? It demonstrates that trust, when minted into a portable, unchanging form, can become the most powerful commodity of all, an idea that would eventually circle the globe. This focus on portable value, however, was just one solution to the challenge of organization. Another civilization, isolated on a windswept island, developed a system to measure something far more fixed and fundamental, the very land that sustained them. A single, massive clay jar could hold the entire economy of a Minoan palace. The pithos was the Bronze Age standard for everything from olive oil to grain, a volumetric unit built directly into the architecture of storerooms at Knossos and Phaistos. These towering ceramic jars, often taller than a person, were not made in random sizes. Artisans crafted them to standardized capacities, with volumes likely derived from the human embrace or the span of two outstretched arms, creating a measure that was both intuitive and consistent. Archaeologist Colin Renfrew explains that the pithos was both a container and a measure, embedding economy into daily life in Bronze Age Crete. This seamless integration was the system's genius. A palace scribe walking through a magazine lined with these identical jars could quickly record the kingdom's wealth on a clay tablet. A single mark might represent one full pithos of wine, while another denoted a half jar of precious saffron. This precise accounting gave the central authority unprecedented control. It allowed them to allocate grain for 1,000 workers, distribute oil to workshops producing fine pottery, and plan lavish religious festivals that required precise amounts of food and drink. The pithos was also a tool of resilience. Rows of these jars, filled during times of plenty, formed a strategic reserve against drought or failed trade missions, a tangible form of risk management that secured the society against disaster. How did such volumetric standards reflect the Minoans' innovative spirit? They reveal a culture that saw no division between art and administration, where the very vessel that held the wine was also a unit of economic planning. It was a system of beautiful, practical harmony. These 21 systems, from the Egyptian Cubit to the Minoan pithos, share a common thread. They were not just about counting or weighing. They were about creating order from chaos, about building trust between strangers, and about weaving the fundamental needs of life into a stable, functioning society. They are a testament to the quiet, persistent human ingenuity that built our world long before the first standard ruler was ever manufactured. Each of these 21 systems was a cultural fingerprint, a unique answer to the universal questions of how to build, trade, and govern. The Cubit translated divine will into stone, while the Koku quantified a lord's power in baskets of rice. They were not cold calculations but reflections of what a society valued most, whether it was cosmic harmony, legal fairness, or sheer survival in a harsh landscape. The political scientist James C. Scott crystallizes this idea, stating that standardization is the first step toward state-making. A shared measurement system was the first thread used to weave scattered villages and diverse peoples into a cohesive civilization with a common identity. When we step back and compare them, clear patterns emerge across continents and millennia. The human body itself provided the most immediate and universal standard. giving us the cubit from the elbow, the ell from the forearm, and the auguier from the outstretched arms. For volume and value, societies consistently turned to the stomach and the soil, creating units like the Modius and the gur to measure the grain that fed their people. This was not a coincidence. It was a direct response to the human need for predictability and fairness in a precarious world. A farmer needed to know his plot was measured justly, and a laborer needed to trust that his daily ration was the same as his neighbor's. The legacy of this ancient ingenuity is still with us today, woven into the very fabric of our daily lives. The inch you use to measure a piece of wood is a direct descendant of the Roman uncia, or 1/12 of a foot. The act of dividing an hour into 60 minutes echoes the Sumerian sexagesimal system that governed the gur. These are not mere historical curiosities. They are living artifacts of a time when measurement was the key to building a world that made sense. So what does this mean for our hyper-connected, globalized present? It reminds us that beneath the complex digital systems and international standards, the fundamental human need remains unchanged, the need for a shared language of value, a common rule that everyone can trust. The quiet genius of the ancient world was its profound understanding that before you can build an empire, you must first agree on the length of a rope. These 21 systems, from the Egyptian Cubit to the Minoan Pythos, share a common thread. They were not just about counting or weighing, they were about creating order from chaos, about building trust between strangers, and about weaving the fundamental needs of life into a stable, functioning society. They are a testament to the quiet, persistent human ingenuity that built our world long before the first standard ruler was ever manufactured. Each of these systems was a cultural fingerprint, a unique answer to the universal questions of how to build, trade, and govern. The Cubit translated divine will into stone, while the Koku quantified a lord's power in baskets of rice. They were not cold calculations but reflections of what a society valued most, whether it was cosmic harmony, legal fairness, or sheer survival in a harsh landscape. The political scientist James C. Scott crystallizes this idea, stating that standardization is the first step toward state-making. A shared measurement system was the first thread used to weave scattered villages and diverse peoples into a cohesive civilization with a common identity. When we step back and compare them, clear patterns emerge across continents and millennia. The human body itself provided the most immediate and universal standard, giving us the cubit from the elbow, the ell from the forearm, and the auguier from the outstretched arms. For volume and value, societies consistently turned to the stomach and the soil, creating units like the Modius and the gur to measure the grain that fed their people. This was not a coincidence. It was a direct response to the human need for predictability and fairness in a precarious world. A farmer needed to know his plot was measured justly, and a laborer needed to trust that his daily ration was the same as his neighbor's. The legacy of this ancient ingenuity is still with us today, woven into the very fabric of our daily lives. The inch you use to measure a piece of wood is a direct descendant of the Roman uncia, or 1/12 of a foot. The act of dividing an hour into 60 minutes echoes the Sumerian sexagesimal system that governed the gur. These are not mere historical curiosities. They are living artifacts of a time when measurement was the key to building a world that made sense. So what does this mean for our hyper-connected, globalized present? It reminds us that beneath the complex digital systems and international standards, the fundamental human need remains unchanged, the need for a shared language of value, a common rule that everyone can trust. The quiet genius of the ancient world was its profound understanding that before you can build an empire, you must first agree on the length of a rope.